Love left no scar on her. A bell that never rings cleanly. A woman who falls in love at 7 and forgets by 8. And a man counting out the days like coins. Let us begin. The rain came to the lane before the light did. Hermione heard it first against the copper gutter, a thin, irregular drumming that meant autumn had finally stopped pretending, and then against the window glass, where it gathered and ran in slow threads. She had been awake since 4. The doe always woke first, and she had learned to wake with it, the way one learns the breathing of someone sleeping beside you. She worked in the dark for the first hour. That was habit now, and habit was the only medicine that had ever done her any good. Flour on the marble, the heel of her hand going down and forward, the dough turning under her palm like something with a slow pulse. There was a burn on the inside of her left forearm, a shiny pink comma from a tray she had grabbed without a cloth last Tuesday. Or she assumed it was last Tuesday. Time in the shop had gone soft at the edges. The oven had its own hours, and she lived inside them. The bakery had no name on the window. She had meant to paint one and never had. People called it the little place off Ravensbourne Lane, or more often hers, and that was enough. After the war, everyone had wanted to give her things. Titles, medals, a seat on committees with long names and longer silences. She had wanted a room with an oven in it. She had wanted to make something at 7 in the morning that would be gone by noon, eaten, finished, harmless. Nothing she baked could be misused. Nothing she baked would be argued about in a courtroom in 10 years. At 6, she lit the lamps. At 6:30, the first proving trays went in, and the shop filled with that particular warmth, yeast and scorched sugar and the faint iron tang of the old range, that she had come to think of as the smell of being all right. At 7:10, the bell above the door rang. It was a small brass bell with a crack in its throat, so it never chimed cleanly. It made a sound like a coin dropped on wood. She was reaching for the cloth to wipe her hands before she had even looked up, and she noticed that. Noticed her own hands moving ahead of her thoughts, as if they had done this many times and were tired of waiting for her to catch up. "You're wet through," she said. Draco Malfoy stood on the mat with the rain still coming off the shoulders of his grey coat. He did not shake it off. He simply stood there for a moment, the way a man stands in a doorway when he has been walking a long time in weather and has forgotten that indoors is warmer. "It's raining," he said. "I'd worked that out." Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not a smile, the place where a smile would go if he ever let one out. She had known who he was on his first visit, of course. Everyone knew who he was. There had been a fortnight, months ago now, when she had felt the old thing rise in her chest whenever the bell cracked at 7:10. That cold, alert wariness she had carried for 6 years, like a stone in her pocket. But he never said anything cruel. He never said much at all. He came in. He bought the same thing. He paid in exact coin and left. And slowly the stone had worn smooth from being turned over and over. And then one morning she had reached for it and found it gone. "The usual?" she said. "If you have it." "I always have it." She was already sliding the parchment sleeve from the stack. "You're the only person in Britain who eats plain croissants. Everyone else wants almond or chocolate, or I had a woman last week ask for one with rose in it. Rose. How was it? Vile, Hermione said. It was like eating a very expensive candle. He made a low sound in his throat that might, in a warmer country, have been a laugh. She put 2 in the sleeve instead of 1, as she always did, and as always she did not mention it, and as always he did not mention it either, though she saw his eyes go to the sleeve and stay there a half-second too long. He set the coins on the counter in a small, neat tower, largest to smallest. She had watched him do that perhaps 100 times, and she still liked watching it. There was something in the precision that gave him away. A man holding himself in order the way you hold a cracked cup, very level, very careful, so that nothing spills. You could sit, she said. She hadn't planned to say it. The words came out of her the way her hands had gone for the cloth, ahead of her, sure of themselves. He looked at the window. Rain was crawling down it in wide, wavering channels, and the lane beyond had gone to grey and silver. It was the kind of rain that made the whole world seem indoors. For a minute, he said. He took the chair nearest the range. He always took that one. She would have thought a man like him would sit by the window, the good light, the view of who was coming. But no. The corner, his back to the wall and the heat of the oven at his shoulder, like something warming a cold animal. She brought him tea he hadn't asked for. He accepted it as if he had. "You've cut your hand," he said. Hermione looked down. There was a fine red line across the pad of her thumb, from the bread knife, so recent she hadn't felt it yet. "So, I have. You should see to it. It's nothing. It's bleeding into my breakfast." "It is not bleeding into your breakfast." But she went to the basin and ran the water cold over it, and when she turned back, he had shifted the tray of cooling rolls a foot to the left, away from the drip of the ceiling that only ever appeared in heavy rain, the one she kept meaning to fix, the one she had never once mentioned to a customer. She stood with the water running and looked at his back and thought, "How did you know about the drip?" The thought had a strange shape. It didn't fit the room. She turned the tap off, and it slid away from her like a name on the tip of the tongue. He stayed longer than a minute. The rain saw to that. It came down harder, thickening until the lane vanished, and Hermione went about her work while he sat with his tea going cold in his hands. She took a batch of dark loaves from the oven and knocked their bottoms with her knuckle, listening for the hollow note. She rolled and cut and folded, and she talked. She hadn't meant to do that either. She told him about the ministry letter she hadn't answered, the fourth one, the one that used the word duty twice in the same sentence. She told him that she woke at 4 now without needing to be woken, and that it frightened her a little, how easily her body had agreed to a new life. She told him she had not read a book properly in 7 months, not the way she used to read them, and that she was not sure whether that was healing or something else wearing the same coat. He listened the way very few people listen. He did not nod along. He did not wait with his mouth half opened for his turn. He simply took what she said and held it, and when he answered the thing she had actually meant. "You're afraid the person who did all that isn't in there anymore," he said. Hermione stopped with the scraper in her hand. "Yes," she said. "She's in there. You can't know that. No, he agreed. But you've argued with me twice this morning, and it's not yet 9. She laughed, a real one, surprised out of her, and the sound seemed to go through him. He set the cup down and turned it once on its saucer, a quarter turn, then another. His hands were long and cold-looking. There was a silver ring on the smallest finger of his left hand, worn thin, and beneath it, at the inner wrist where the sleeve had ridden up, she saw a thread of white against the skin. Not a scar, paler than a scar, like frost fixed under glass. "What's that?" she said. He pulled the cuff down. "Nothing. It didn't look like—" "It's nothing, Granger." The name went through her like a hand closing. He had not said her name in months. She had begun to think he couldn't. Something had changed in the air of the room. She felt it the way one feels a door opens somewhere else in a house. He was very still. The muscle at his jaw stood out and then let go. Outside, the rain slackened and the lane came back. Wet cobbles, the blur of an umbrella going past. And she understood, with a small sinking, that he was about to leave. "Draco," she said. She had never called him that. Not once. Not in 7 years. It arrived in her mouth like a word from another language that she nonetheless knew perfectly. He closed his eyes. It was only a moment. His lashes were pale and his face did something she could not read. Not pain exactly. More the look of a man setting down a weight he's been carrying so long that the relief hurts worse than the burden. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't what?" "Don't be kind to me. It's a poor use of a morning. I'll use my mornings as I like." "Yes," he said, "you would." And then, so briefly that afterwards she would not have been able to swear to it, he reached across the counter and touched the back of her hand. 2 fingers. The lightest possible pressure, just above the knuckle, where the flower had dried to a pale ghost on her skin. His fingertips were cold. She felt the cold go up her arm and into her chest and settle there and become something warm. And she thought, with a clarity that startled her, oh, there it is. I have fallen in love with a man who buys croissants. He took his hand back. "Same time tomorrow," she said. Her voice came out lower than she meant it to. "Same time tomorrow," he agreed. He picked up the parchment sleeve. He went to the door and the cracked bell dropped its coin of sound into the room. Then he stopped, one hand flat against the frame, his head bowed, and stood there long enough that she came out from behind the counter because something in the line of his shoulders had begun to worry her. "Draco?" He turned around. His wand was already in his hand. "I'm sorry," he said. "You'll be all right in a moment. You always are." The light that came was soft and white, and it did not hurt at all. When it faded, Hermione was standing in the middle of her own shop with a cloth in her hand, and no idea why. The bell was still swinging. Rain on the glass, a tray of rolls cooling, the day only just begun. She frowned and shook her head, and went back to the counter feeling vaguely, inexplicably bereft. The way you feel when you wake from a dream you cannot recall, but would give a great deal to have back. Out in the lane, Draco Malfoy stood in the wet with his eyes shut and a small glass vial in his fist, the fresh silver thread of her turning slowly inside it. He put it in his coat pocket, where it clicked against the others. Then he walked away, counting under his breath, because tomorrow he would have to do it all again. The flat above the apothecary on Blunder Street had one window, one bed he rarely used, and a cabinet that took up an entire wall. He came in at 7:30 with the rain still on him and did not take off his coat. There was an order to these mornings, and he kept it the way other men kept religion, not from belief, but because the alternative was to stand in an empty room with nothing between himself and the hour. First, the sleeve of pastries onto the table. He never ate them. He had eaten the first 300 odd in the beginning out of some notion that it would be a waste otherwise. Then one morning he had found he could not swallow, and after that he simply set them down and let them go stale and burned them at the end of the week. The ritual mattered more than the food. Buying them was the ticket of entry. It bought him 11 minutes at a counter, and 11 minutes was what he had. Second, the coat off. Third, the vial out of the pocket. He held it up to the grey window light. Inside, the strand of her turned and folded on itself, silver white, restless as smoke that hasn't decided to be smoke yet. Memories were meant to lie still in glass. Hers never did. He had noticed that in the second week and had let himself feel something about it for approximately 4 seconds. And then he had put the feeling away in the same place he put everything else. The cabinet had 11 shelves. He opened it. 311 small glass cylinders, stoppered with wax, standing in rows like a chemist's inventory of a single, endlessly repeated afternoon. He had labelled the first 40 with dates. Then he had stopped labelling them, because writing the date made it a diary, and a diary implied a person keeping it, and he had preferred, at that stage, to think of himself as a mechanism. He set the new one in its place. 312. The wax stopper was still warm from his hand. He stood looking at the rows with his knuckles resting on the shelf edge, and the pressure of the wood went white through the skin, and he held it there until it ached, and then a while longer. She said my name. He shut the cabinet. It had been a Tuesday in January, in the year the war ended, and the healers at St. Mungo's had used the phrase no longer a question of if. His mother had been in the 4th bed of a long white ward with her hands laid on the coverlet, and she had looked at him and said, in a voice that was already mostly air, "Don't do anything foolish, darling." Which was how Narcissa Malfoy said, "I know exactly what you are thinking." He'd gone home. He'd gone down into the undercellar with a candle and a bone-handled knife, and he had opened the book that the blacks had kept for 400 years and never once had the decency to burn. Vitae Pretium, the price of a life. The rite was simple, which should have warned him. All the truly ruinous ones were. You did not need a circle or a chant or the moon in any particular quarter. You needed blood, a name, and an unbroken willingness. What you were doing was making an offer, and the thing you were offering it to was not a god or a devil, but something much older and more administrative than either, the ledger itself, the running account of what is owed. You told it, "Take from me instead," and it looked at you, and it went through your pockets, and it took the only thing you had of any value. He had not known when he cut his palm what that would be. He had assumed his life. He had been almost glad. It had taken his capacity to be loved, not to love. That would have been mercy. That would have been an anesthetic. He kept every ounce of that, intact and functional and utterly useless. What the rite took was the safety of him. Love was to run downhill into him from now on and find no flaw, and whoever poured it would empty out with it. Affection that named itself, that settled and took root. It would kill the one who felt it. Slowly, if the feeling was slow. Quickly, if it wasn't. His mother had walked out of St. Mungo's 11 days later, thin and bewildered and alive, and had lived still, in a house in the Loire with a garden she wrote to him about, in letters he answered in 3 lines. She loved him. Of course she loved him. She had loved him since before he had a face, which was, apparently, the loophole. The debt could not touch what predated it. He had spent a fortnight on that question with a fever of terror in his gut before he understood it. Old love was mortared in. New love was the poison. And there was the second clause, the one he had found written in the margin in an ancestor's spidery hand, and which he had at first refused to believe. The account is kept in continuous recollection. Break the thread, and the ledger loses its place. He had laughed when he read it. It had come out of him in the dark cellar like something tearing. Break the thread, as though a person were a sentence you could take a pen to. The last clause he had discovered on his own, 3 days after the rite, when he had tried to tell Blaise Zabini what he had done, and found that his throat simply would not do it. Not a struggle, not a choking, just an absence where the words should be, as if that particular set of sounds had been quietly removed from the world. He could write nothing of it either. The quill lifted from the parchment of its own accord. He could gesture at it, circle it, stand at its edge and point. He could not name it, could not warn, could not explain. A curse that gags you is not a curse. It is a strategy. He had not gone into the bakery on purpose. That was the part he would have liked to explain to somebody, if there had been anybody, and if the words had been available. There had been no plan. He had been walking Ravensbourne Lane in April with a letter from his mother in his pocket, and no particular destination, and the smell had come out of a propped door. Yeast, hot sugar, scorched flour, and it had gone into him like a hook into a fish. He had not eaten properly in 4 months. He had not wanted anything in 4 months. And he had stood on the wet cobbles outside a shop with no name on the window, and wanted, stupidly, animally, the way a body wants when it has forgotten to ask permission. He had gone in, and she had been there, with her hair tied up badly and flour to the elbow, and she had looked at him for a long, level moment, and had not called for anyone, and had not reached for her wand, and had said, "We're not open for another 10 minutes, but I've got some that are cooling, if you don't mind them hot." He had said, "I don't mind them hot." That had been 312 days ago, near enough, and on that first morning nothing had happened, because on that first morning she had merely been civil, and he had merely been hungry, and civility is not a debt. It had taken 11 days for the frost to appear on her wrist. He remembered. He would always remember. That was his punishment. He was the only one carrying the whole thing. He remembered how she had laughed at something he said about the rose pastry, and had reached across to take his cup, and her sleeve had slid, and there, at the tender inside of her wrist, had been a hairline of white, threaded just under the skin, bright as a crack in ice. He had looked at his own wrist, where the same mark had sat since January, and he had understood, standing in a warm room that smelled of bread, that she had begun to love him, and that it had already started to kill her. He had obliviated her that first time in a blind panic, badly, out in the lane where anyone might have seen, and had then been sick against the wall of a shuttered bookshop. The white thread was gone from her wrist the next morning. Gone completely. He had checked with his heart slamming, and his fingers not quite steady, and the skin had been clean and unmarked, and the ledger had lost its place. That was the day he made the rule. Come every day. 11 minutes. Take it back before you go. Because, and here was the thing that no one would ever be able to shout at him more loudly than he had already shouted at himself in 300 silent nights. He had tried the other option first. He had tried not going. He had lasted 9 days. On the 10th, he had walked past the end of Ravensbourne Lane at 7:10, not turning in, just walking past, and had seen her through the window, standing at the counter, looking at the door, not working. Looking at the door with an expression he had no right to and could not stop seeing. And then she had shaken herself and gone back to the trays, and he had stood in the road like a man with his coat on fire, and understood that he was not going to survive being a decent person about this. So he had chosen the other thing, the daily theft, the small, precise, unforgivable arrangement whereby he got to have her, and she got to have nothing, over and over, and nobody ever came to any harm except in the way that mattered most. He knew what it was. He was not confused about it. He had spent his adolescence being told what he was by people who had wanted to make him worse, and then a year being told what he was by people who wanted him punished, and he had found that neither had improved his character, so he had stopped arguing with the charge. He simply went on doing it, and did not permit himself the luxury of describing himself out loud, because a man who narrates his own damnation is asking to be argued with, and there was no one to argue, and he did not deserve to be relieved. He went to the window. The rain had stopped. Down in the street, a woman was tipping water off an awning with a broom handle, and it came down in a bright rope and hit the cobbles and ran. She said my name. That was new. That was the 4th new thing this week. He kept an account of these too, though not in the cabinet. Wednesday. She had reached for the 2nd cup before he'd asked for tea. Friday. She had begun a sentence with you always, and then stopped, frowning, as if the sentence had been handed to her by a stranger. Saturday. She had moved the chair by the range out from the wall before he came in, and had looked at her own hand doing it with something like alarm. Today, Draco. Memory could be taken. He had proved that 312 times, but there was apparently a residue, a track worn by repetition, a groove that the charm smoothed over, and that some other, deeper, less obedient part of her kept finding again in the dark. Her hands knew him. Her mouth knew his name. Whatever it was in a person that learns to trust before the mind gets a vote, that had been learning about him every morning for 312 days, and had never once been made to forget. He put his forehead against the cold glass. He should stop. That was the sane conclusion, the one any decent man would reach. It was accumulating. It was leaking through. And the sensible thing was to walk away in the direction of never. He stood at the window for a long time and thought about the 9 days he had managed the last time and what her face had looked like through the glass on the 10th. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow, and then I'll stop. He had thought that on 206 previous mornings. He kept no cabinet for those. He went out at noon because the pastries had to be replaced with something he could actually eat, and because the flat had begun to have that quality it got when he stayed in it too long, the air going thick, the walls attending. Blunder Street ran into the top of Ravensbourne Lane. He had chosen the flat for exactly that reason, and had lied to himself about it at the time with great fluency. He did not intend to walk down the lane. He walked down the lane. The shop had its door propped with an iron weight shaped like a hair. Through the window he could see the counter, the shelves half emptied by the morning trade, the brass scales she never used because she measured everything by hand and by eye and was never wrong. She was serving a small boy who had his coins laid out on the counter and was counting them with visible agony. Hermione had her elbows on the wood and her chin in her hands, and she was waiting, not hurrying him, not helping, with an expression of tremendous patience. And when he got to the end and looked up in triumph, she said something that made him grin so hard his ears moved. Draco stood across the lane by the ironmonger's with his hands in his pockets. This is what you get, he thought, without self-pity, as a man reads a bill. 11 minutes, and this. The boy left. Hermione straightened and swept the coins into her palm, and then she stopped. She stood very still behind the counter with her fist closed around the money, and she looked at the door. At the empty doorway, at the propped iron hair, at the strip of grey lane beyond. Her brows drew in. Her mouth opened slightly, as if she were about to ask a question of somebody who was not there. Then she looked down at her own left forearm, at the shiny pink comma of a burn she had earned 4 days ago and been made to forget 4 times, and touched it with 2 fingers, the way you touch a word in a book to keep your place. She frowned harder, and then, slowly, she set the coins down. She wiped her hands on her apron. She went to the shelf under the till where the order book lived, and she took out a scrap of paper and a pencil, and she stood for a moment chewing the end of it with her eyes on nothing at all. Draco watched her begin to write. He was too far away to see the words. He was not too far away to see her face while she wrote them. That particular narrow, hunting look he had watched across a classroom for 6 years, and had once, God help him, wanted to slap off her, and now would have given his remaining name to keep intact for 1 uninterrupted week. She folded the paper twice. She looked around the shop as though it might be watching her. And then she reached up and slid it under the lid of the china sugar tin on the high shelf, where nobody would find it. Nobody, that is, except herself. The burn on her forearm was healing wrong. Hermione noticed it on a Thursday, standing at the basin with her sleeves pushed back and the water running cold over her wrists, because the ovens had made the room close and airless. The mark was a shiny pink comma below the elbow, and it had the tight, glossy look of a burn about 4 days old. The trouble was that it had looked exactly 4 days old for at least a fortnight. She turned her arm to the window light. She had not, so far as she could recall, touched a tray without a cloth in weeks. She was careful. She had been careful since she was 11. Carelessness had never been one of her faults, whatever else was. And yet, Here was this small pink question mark set into her skin, healing at the pace of a slug on a wet path. And every time she looked at it, something in her chest gave a strange small lurch, like missing a step in the dark. She dried her hands and wrote it down. That was new. The writing down. She had begun it without any conscious decision, the way she had begun waking at 4. There was a scrap of paper in the pocket of her apron now at all times, and she added things to it at odd moments, small unremarkable facts that felt, for reasons she could not defend, like evidence. Burn. No memory of getting it. Not healing. Chair by range pulled out. I did not pull it out. 2 croissants in the sleeve. Why 2? Who takes 2? Bell rings, and I look up before it rings. She read the list back and felt ridiculous, and folded it and kept it. The body remembers what the mind is not permitted to. She would not have put it that way then. She had no framework for it yet, only a growing accumulation of wrongness, the way you notice a room has been entered by a stranger before you can say which object has moved. But her hands had become insubordinate. They went for the second cup. They set out the good tea, the smoky one she disliked and had bought by accident in March and had somehow never thrown away. And they set it out at 7 each morning without asking her. And then, at 9:30, she would find it cold on the counter and no memory of pouring it. Once, mid-morning, she caught herself humming. She stopped dead with a rolling pin in her fist. It was a tune she did not know. It was not a wireless tune, not a wedding tune, not anything from the years when there had been music. It was slow and in a minor key, and it had 4 notes that turned back on themselves, and she stood in the middle of her own shop trying to catch the end of it, and the harder she reached, the faster it went, and then it was gone entirely, and she was left standing there with her heart going like a hunted thing, and flour drifting off the pin onto her boots. That night she did not sleep. The flat above the bakery was 2 rooms and a stove, and she lay in the dark listening to the building tick and cool, and thought about the 7 months she had spent telling everyone, in letters and at dinners, and once, humiliatingly, to a ministry-appointed mind healer with a soft voice and a soft chair, that she was perfectly well, only tired. And she had been. That was what made this different. She knew what her own damage felt like. She had lived inside it, catalogued it, made her peace with the parts that would not mend. Damage was a room she had furnished. This was not that. This was the sensation of arriving home to find a chair moved 18 inches to the left, and being told, gently, by everyone, that it had always been there. At 4, she got up and went down and made bread. He came at 7:10, as he did. She had the door propped with the iron hair, and the rain had stopped in the night, leaving the lane bright and wet, every cobble holding its own small piece of sky. When the bell dropped its cracked coin of sound, she was already turning, already wiping her palms, and she thought with a flare of vicious satisfaction, There it is. My hands know you. "Good morning," Draco said. "Is it?" He paused half a step inside the door. "That's a novel opening. I'm in a novel mood." She put the sleeve on the counter, 2 croissants in it, and watched his eyes go to it and away. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "How often do you come here?" The change in him was very small. She might have missed it if she had not spent the last 3 days sharpening herself against exactly this sort of thing. His weight settled. His hands went into his coat pockets, not casually, deliberately, the way a man puts a knife out of reach. "I don't keep count," he said. "Don't you?" She leaned her forearms on the counter. "Because you're my only customer who pays in exact coin, and you stack it largest to smallest, and you always sit in that chair, and I can tell you the shape of the tower you build without looking at it. That's not the sort of thing you learn about a stranger. You're observant. I'm not, actually. I'm thorough, which is different and much less flattering." She held his gaze. "So, how often?" The silence went long. Somewhere out in the lane, a cart went by with a bad wheel, and the sound of it filled the shop and then thinned out and left them alone with each other. "Often," he said at last. "Every day." Something happened in his throat. She saw it. A hitch, a catch, the muscle working as though he had begun to speak and been physically stopped. His jaw tightened until she could see the shape of the bone through the skin. "You'd have to ask yourself," he said. "I have," said Hermione. "She's not talking." He looked at her then, properly, and there was something in his face so undefended that she felt it in the base of her stomach. Grief, she thought. That's grief. Why on earth is that grief? "Sit down," she said. "I've made the smoky tea, which I hate, incidentally, and buy anyway, and I would very much like somebody to explain that to me." He sat. He always sat. That was the thing she had begun to notice about their standoffs, that he never actually left them. He stood at the edge of every conversation, like a man at the lip of cold water, and then, every time, he waded in. She worked while they talked. It was easier that way. The words came out sideways, and she had learned, from somewhere, from some part of her that seemed to have done all this before, that he answered more freely when she wasn't looking at him. "There's a woman on Thackeray Street," she said, folding butter into dough, "who's been buying my bread since June, every Wednesday, 2 loaves. And last week I said something about her husband, and she looked at me as though I'd slapped her, and it turned out he's been dead since the spring, and I'd been asking after him for 4 months. You forgot. I never forget. That's my whole personality. Ask anyone who's ever tried to have an argument with me." She turned the dough 90 degrees. "But I forgot that. And I forget other things now, and I'm beginning to suspect the two are not the same kind of forgetting." "Meaning?" "Meaning some things go because I'm tired, and there's too much, and I'm 40 pounds heavier in the head than I used to be." The pin came down. "And some things go the way a tooth goes. There's a hole. You keep putting your tongue in it." Draco set his cup down. It made a small sound in the quiet. "And what's in the hole?" he said. "I don't know. That's what makes it a hole." She looked up then and caught him with his guard entirely down, staring at her with an expression that had nothing careful in it at all. It lasted perhaps a second. Then he gathered himself in, feature by feature, and she watched him do it, and she thought, "You are the most frightened person I have ever met, and you are frightened of me." "Show me your wrist," she said. "No?" "Why not?" "Because you'll ask questions I can't answer, and then I'll have to sit here and disappoint you, and I've a limited appetite for that this early." "Can't," said Hermione. "Not won't. Can't." He went very still. "You said can't," she pressed. You've said it twice this week, and both times you looked like a man being held underwater. What is it that you can't? His hand hit the table, not a slam. A flat, controlled pressure, palm down, hard enough to make the cup ring in its saucer, and he sat with his head bowed over it, and his shoulders rigid, and his breath going in and out through his nose in a way she recognized, because she had done it herself in the years when the alternative was screaming. "Don't," he said. "Granger, please, please." She had known this man since she was 12 years old. She had watched him call her things she had needed a dictionary for. She had hit him in the face once with the flat of her hand and felt the shock of it go up her arm. And she had never in her life heard him say please to anyone about anything. The kitchen ticked. Somewhere above them, a pipe knocked twice. She came around the counter. She did not touch him. She stood at the corner of the table with her hands floury and useless at her sides, and looked down at the pale crown of his bent head, and she felt the thing in her chest that had been circling for weeks come into land. Oh, she thought. Oh, this is bad. This is much worse than I thought. "All right," she said quietly. "All right, I've stopped." He didn't move for a long moment. Then he sat back and lifted his face, and it was composed again, and his eyes were red-rimmed and dry. "You should charge me more," he said, "for the tea. You don't even ask for the tea. And yet it arrives. Poor business." "Terrible business," she agreed. Her voice came out unsteady. "I'm going to go on making it." "I know," he said. "That's rather the problem." He left at 11 minutes past. She noticed that too. The length of him, the exact measured span of it, always the same, as though he were serving a sentence rather than eating breakfast. At the door, he stopped, one hand on the frame, and turned back. "Granger." "Yes?" "If you found something," he said slowly, and she could hear the effort in it, the way each word was being carried up out of a deep place against resistance. "Written down, in your own hand, something you didn't remember writing." Hermione's pulse went hard in her ears. "Yes," she said. "Believe her," said Draco. "She's cleverer than both of us." And then his wand was in his hand, and she saw it. She actually saw it this time. The black wood, the movement, his mouth shaping a word she didn't hear. And she had time to think one whole clear thought before the white light took her. "I know you. I know you. I know you. I know you." She came back to herself at the counter with a cloth in her hand and the bell still swinging in its bracket. For a moment there was nothing at all. The shop, the light, the smell of the second batch. Then the emptiness arrived, the way water arrives in a footprint, and she stood with her fists against the wood and felt a grief so large and so entirely without an object that it made her knees loosen. She had lost something. She did not know its name. She did not know its shape or its colour or how long she had held it. She only knew the size of the space it had left, and the space was enormous, and it was in her, and it had been there. She understood this with a cold, dropping certainty for a very long time. Hermione stood in the middle of her bakery and pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes until the dark went red. Then she stopped. She lowered her hands. She looked around the room, at the trays, the propped door, the chair by the range that was standing 18 inches from the wall where she had certainly not put it. She reached into her apron pocket and found a scrap of paper, folded twice, and did not remember putting it there. She opened it. She read her own handwriting. Burn. No memory of getting it. Not healing. Bell rings, and I look up before it rings. Her hands began to shake. She turned the scrap over. She took the pencil from behind her ear, and she wiped the counter clean with her sleeve, and she leaned over it and wrote, in letters pressed so hard they scored the paper, "Someone is taking my mornings. Whoever writes this, you are not tired. You are not ill. You are being robbed, and you are the only one keeping the account, so keep it properly. Note the time. Note the weather. Note who is in the room. Do not tell him you are writing this down." She read it twice. Then she stood on the stool and reached up to the high shelf and lifted the lid of the china sugar tin. Inside, curled against the porcelain, were 9 folded scraps of paper in her own handwriting. She read all 9 on the floor behind the counter, with her back against the cupboard doors and the sugar tin in her lap, and the shop unattended, and the door standing open to the lane. They were not in order. She had not thought to date them, whoever she had been on those mornings, and that oversight made her want to put her head down on her knees and howl. "You idiot, you absolute fool, the one thing you had to do." Until she remembered that the woman who had written them had been working in the dark with a torch that went out every 11 minutes, and had done rather well, all things considered. The earliest ones were barely anything. A shopping list with 3 words underlined at the bottom. Why 2 croissants? A scrap that said only he knows about the drip in the ceiling. One that said, "Do not be charming, be careful," which struck her as such an unlikely thing for her to have written to herself that she read it 4 times. Then they sharpened. She could feel the intelligence in them gathering the way weather gathers. He comes at 7:10. He leaves at 11 minutes past. Not 10. Not 12. He is counting. I keep waking up mid-morning with wet cheeks and no reason. Ask him about January. He goes grey when you say January. And then the 9th in handwriting so hurried it slanted off the edge of the paper. He does something at the door. I have caught the shape of it twice now, the turn, the raised hand. Next time, don't look at his face. Look at his hand. Look at his hand, and remember. The word ran out. The pencil had simply stopped, mid-letter, and the trailing line went off the paper's edge like a road into fog. Hermione sat on the cold flags with that scrap between her finger and thumb, and understood quite calmly that she was looking at the exact moment her own mind had been switched off. She did not cry. There was no room in her for it. What filled her instead was something cleaner and much older. The same thing that had once made her put her hand up in a burning classroom. The same thing that had made her walk into a forest. A hard, bright fury with a spine in it. Right, she thought. All right then, let's do this properly. She closed the shop. She had never closed the shop. She turned the sign and bolted the door and drew the blind against the lane, and then she went upstairs and dragged the kitchen table into the middle of the floor and laid the 9 scraps out on it in a grid, and stood over them the way she had once stood over a map of a country she was trying to survive. By noon, she had a system. Paper was compromised. She knew that instinctively, though she could not have said why yet. Something about the ninth note, about how neat the others had been, about the sheer statistical improbability of 9 notes surviving in a shop where she cleaned every surface daily. Someone would find paper. So the paper would be a decoy, and it would sit exactly where it had always sat, and it would say only what she was willing for him to read. The real account would go somewhere else. She chose the ledger, the great fat order book under the till, which she had kept since April, and which nobody but her had ever opened, and in whose margins she now began, in a tiny cramped shorthand, in the numerals for letters code she had invented at 14 for the express purpose of writing things Ron and Harry couldn't read over her shoulder, to build the case. Subject arrives 7:10. Subject departs 7:21. Subject knows the drip, the chair, my burn, my brother's name. I have no brother. Check this. Subject cannot say certain words. Watch the throat. And beneath, in ordinary letters, so that even a version of herself with no memory at all could read it in 3 seconds flat. The man in the grey coat takes your memory. He is not a stranger. You love him. She looked at that last line for a long time. She had not intended to write it. Her hand had done it, the way her hands did things now, and having done it, she found she could not cross it out, because it was the only sentence on the page she was completely certain about. He came the next morning at 7:10. She had been awake since 2. She had the ledger under the till and a scrap of decoy paper in the sugar tin and a plan folded up small and hot behind her breastbone. And when the cracked bell dropped its coin, she felt her whole body come alert like a hound. "Good morning," she said. "You've been up all night. How can you possibly know that? You've got the wrong apron on." He was unwinding his scarf, not looking at her. "You keep the clean ones on the hook by the stairs, and you don't change until 6. That one's got Tuesday's jam on it." Hermione looked down. There was, indeed, a dark red smear across the hip. "That is a genuinely unsettling degree of attention," she said. "You asked." "I did." She set the sleeve on the counter. 2, as usual. "Tell me why it's 2. He stopped with the scarf in his hands. "Because you put in 2, he said. "Yes." "Why?" "You've never told me." "Then let me tell you now. I have no idea." She kept her voice light and pleasant, and her heart was going so hard she thought he must be able to see the front of her blouse move. "I don't know why I do it. My hand does it. My hand does a great many things lately that I haven't authorized, and I've begun to find it interesting rather than alarming, which is probably the first symptom of something serious." "Granger, do you want the tea?" He looked at her. There was a long, considering pause, and in it she felt something happen. A fine adjustment, a recalibration, the sense of a man discovering that the ground has developed a slope. "Yes," he said. "Sit down, then." She let it run 20 minutes. She did it by talking. She had worked it out at 3 in the morning, lying on her back in the dark. Whatever he was counting, whatever engine drove that 11-minute discipline, it was not stronger than his willingness to listen to her. So, she talked. She talked about the bread and the woman on Thackeray Street, and the ministry letters, and the way the light came into the shop in October, and she watched his hands, and every time he shifted as though to rise, she asked him a question he could not walk out on. At 19 minutes, he said, "I should go. You've got jam on your cuff." "I have not." "You have. Look." and she reached across the table and took his wrist. She had planned it. She had planned it precisely, had lain awake rehearsing the reach and the grip and the half-second before he pulled free. And none of that preparation was any use at all, because the instant her fingers closed on his wrist, every single thought went out of her head. His skin was cold. Colder than a room this warm allowed for, and beneath her fingers, running along the inner wrist where the veins came up blue, was a raised thread of something that was not scar tissue. Hard, fine, faintly rough, like a seam of frost caught under glass. Neither of them moved. Hermione looked at their hands on the table, her fingers, floury at the knuckle, wrapped around his wrist, his own hand open, palm up, entirely unresisting. And then she looked up at his face and found him looking back with an expression of such naked, arrested want that she felt it go through the floor of her stomach. "Draco," she said. His eyes closed. "That's the second time," he said hoarsely. "In 2 days. You've said it twice in 2 days, and you don't know you've said it once. Tell me what this is." "I can't." "Tell me what it does." "Granger, tell me why my hands know you." He pulled free. He did it gently, which was somehow worse. He turned his wrist out of her grip with the care of a man extracting a splinter, and he stood, and he went 2 steps toward the door and stopped with his back to her. "Because you're the cleverest witch of your generation," he said, "and you always have been, and it is going to be the death of you." "That's not an answer." "No?" "Then give me one." He turned around. "I would give you," he said, "everything I have and everything I am not permitted to say, and it would kill you inside a month, and you'd go smiling because you'd think you were being brave. So no. You get pastry and bad tea and 11 minutes, and I get to watch you be alive, and that is the arrangement, and I did not write it." The words hung in the warm air with the flower dust turning through them. "Who did?" said Hermione. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. She watched it happen, watched him try, watched his throat work, and his jaw set, and the tendons stand out in his neck, watched him fight something that had no face and no name, and had clearly beaten him 100 times before. His eyes were streaming by the end of it. He made a sound that was not a word. "Stop," she said. "Stop! Stop! Draco! Stop!" She was around the table before she knew she had moved. She got hold of his forearms. He was shaking, the fine, deep shudder of a horse that has been run too hard. "I've got you," she said. "I've got you. Don't." He bent his head. He put his forehead against her shoulder, just rested it there, the whole weight of it, like a man setting down a stone at the end of a road. And she stood in her ruined apron in the middle of her own shop, with her arms around Draco Malfoy, and felt his breath go hot and unsteady through the cotton at her collarbone. Nobody had held him in a 1.5 years. She knew that the way she knew the oven's hours. She could feel it in the way he did not know what to do with his hands. "You come here every day," she said into his hair. "Don't you?" He nodded once against her shoulder. "And every day you take it away." Another nod, smaller. "Why?" He lifted his head. His face was very close. There was a wet track down one side of it, and he made no move to wipe it away, and his eyes went over her features one by one, mouth, cheek, the small scar at her jaw. The way a man reads a letter he has read 1,000 times, and will have to burn. Because the alternative, he said, is a grave with your name on it, and I have been to enough of those. That's my risk to take. No, it is. It is not, he said. And this is the part where you hate me, and you'll be right, and you won't remember it, so allow me the courtesy of hearing it once. And then his hand was in her hair, sudden, ungentle, the flat of his palm cupping the back of her skull. And for 1/2 second, she thought, with a wild lurch, he's going to kiss me. He didn't. He held her there and looked at her mouth, and then away, and his thumb moved once against her hairline, once unbearably, and then he let go and stepped back. "Same time tomorrow," he said. "Don't you dare." "Granger, don't you dare!" The wand came up. She had promised herself 9 notes, 3 of them underlined. Don't look at his face. Look at his hand. She looked at his hand. She burned it into herself. The black wood, the 2 fingers braced along the shaft, the small, precise flick. And she screamed her own name at herself inside her skull, like a woman throwing a bottle into the sea. Then the white light came, and it did not hurt at all, and she was standing at the counter with a cloth in her hand. He did not leave immediately. That was his mistake, and he would know it later, and he would have made it again. He stood in the empty lane for a moment with the vial warm in his fist, and then he went back inside because there was jam on the front of her apron, and she had been up all night, and there was no one else in the world who was going to make her sit down. She was at the counter, blinking, mildly puzzled, reaching for the tray of rolls. "Sit down for 10 minutes, he said. "You look half dead." "I beg your pardon, who—" She stopped, frowned. "You're the croissants. I'm the croissants." "Right." She rubbed her forehead. "God, yes, fine. 10 minutes." He climbed on the stool himself and reached up to the high shelf and took down the china sugar tin, because she had told him 3 weeks ago that she kept the biscuits in there, and he lifted the lid. A single scrap of paper lay curled against the porcelain. He read it standing on the stool in the empty morning with the smell of bread rising around him. He comes at 7:10 and leaves at 7:21. He takes something. I don't know what yet, but whatever it is, I want it back. And I think, from the way he looks at me, that he wants to give it. Below that, in a rounder, steadier hand, as though she had put the pencil down and picked it up again after some time. "Whoever you are, I am not afraid of you. Stop deciding things for me." The tin slipped. It did not fall. His hand closed on it. But the lid rang against the shelf edge, a bright, shivering note. And down in the shop, Hermione looked up and said, "Everything all right up there?" Draco stood on the stool with the paper in his fist, and his heart going like a fist against a door, and thought about the 9th note, and the 10th, and the 100th, and about how long a woman like this would need before she reassembled the entire architecture of it out of scraps and margins and the memory of a hand. "Fine," he said. Then he folded the paper twice and put it in the range and watched the edges brown and curl and take. The sugar tin was empty on Thursday. Hermione stood on the stool with the lid in her hand and looked into the white curve of the porcelain and felt something in her go quiet and cold and enormously attentive. She had not emptied it. She had made a note about the notes. The ledger under the tills said so, in her cramped shorthand, 3rd margin down, 9, 9, in tin, high shelf. Do not move them, count them daily. And there had been 9 on Tuesday, and she had counted them on Wednesday, and now there were none. So he read them. So he had read them for weeks, probably, and burned them, probably. And every morning she had rebuilt her little fortress out of paper, and every morning he had walked through it like a man through smoke. She put the lid back on. She got down off the stool. She went to the window and stood looking out at the lane where the rain had started again and the cobbles had gone the colour of gunmetal. And she said aloud to nobody in a voice she barely recognised, "Fine, then we'll do it the hard way. Paper burns." That was the lesson, and she took it the way she had taken every lesson in her life, completely, and with a certain grim relish. She spent the day building something better. The ledger stayed. It was too useful to abandon, and its very ordinariness was a kind of camouflage. A man rifling a shop for love notes does not stop to read the tally of Tuesday's flour. But the ledger could be taken too, and so the ledger became the second line. The first line went somewhere he could not reach without her consent, and there was only one place in the world like that. She used a self-inking quill, the sort that muggle-borns bought as novelties, and then found genuinely useful. And she wrote on the inside of her left forearm, below the elbow, in letters small enough to be hidden by a rolled sleeve and dark enough to survive the flour and the water and the heat. 7:10. Grey coat. He erases you. Check ledger. Sugar tin is a decoy. The ink sat under the skin like a tattoo, faintly raised, faintly sore. She rolled her sleeve down over it and pressed her palm flat against the place and stood in her kitchen breathing. Then she added the third line, because 2 was not enough, and she had never in her life thought 2 of anything was enough. Her mother's locket, the small, dull gold oval she had worn since she was 9 and had never once taken off, not through a war, not through Malfoy Manor, not through the year of putting people in the ground, came off its chain and lay in her palm. She opened it with her thumbnail. There was a photograph inside, cracked at one corner, of 2 dentists on a beach in Devon who no longer knew her name. "Sorry," she said to them. "You'd understand." She slid the photograph out and folded it into her pocket and wrote on a disc of paper the size of a fingernail, in a hand so small it made her eyes ache. "He is cursed. He thinks loving him kills. He is trying to save you. He is wrong to decide alone." She snapped the locket shut. She did not know how she knew any of that. She had written it before she had thought it, the way she wrote everything now, from a place beneath the waterline where a great deal of her seemed to be living lately. And the fourth line, because there had to be a fourth, was the code. She wrote it in the ledger, not shorthand this time, something worse. She used the numerals for letters cipher she had built at 14, and then she keyed it to something no legilimens, no charm, no burning range could ever pry out of a woman who had been made to forget. She keyed it to the tune. The 4-note tune she hummed and did not know. Minor, slow, turning back on itself. She wrote out its intervals as numbers along the top margin of a page of flower tallies, and beneath it the message. And she trusted, with a faith that felt closer to prayer than logic, that whatever part of her had kept that melody through 300 erasures would keep the key too. She was, after all, still humming it. He had never managed to take that. He came at 7:10. She was ready. She had rehearsed until her voice was flat with it. "Morning," she said. "You've done something to your arm." Hermione's blood stopped. "I've what?" "You're holding it wrong." He was hanging his coat on the peg. He had begun hanging it on the peg at some point, without either of them remarking on it. "You've had it tucked in against your ribs since I came through the door. Burn?" "Something like that." "Show me." "No." He turned round. There was a beat of stillness, and then something crossed his face, something that was almost horribly like hope. "No," he repeated. "That's what I said." "Say it again." "No," said Hermione. "And I'd be obliged if you'd stop looking at me as though I'd just recited scripture." He sat down in the chair by the range. He did it slowly, and he did not take his eyes off her, and when he spoke, his voice had a rasp in it. "You've never said no to me before." "I find that unlikely. I've been saying no to you since I was 12. "To me," he said, "not to this." "To what, exactly?" And there it was again, the hitch, the throat working, the words going down like a swallowed stone. She watched him fight it and lose. "To breakfast," he said finally, bitterly. She made the tea. Her hands were shaking and she let them. There was no point pretending to a man who noticed the jam on an apron. When she set the cup in front of him, he caught her wrist. Not the marked one, the other. His fingers closed light and cold around the bones of it, and he looked up at her, and neither of them breathed. "Whatever you're doing," he said, "stop. I'm making tea." "Granger." "I'm making tea," she repeated. "For a man who will not tell me his own history in a shop he visits every day, and who will, at approximately 21 minutes past 7, do something to me that I have not agreed to, and I am making it anyway. And if you want to know what that costs, ask me sometime when I'll remember the answer." His grip tightened. "You know," he said. "I know some of it." "How much?" "Enough to be furious, not enough to be useful." She turned her hand over inside his so that their palms met and felt him flinch as though burned. "Ask me the real question." "What's the real question?" "Ask me whether I want you to stop coming." The range ticked. Rain moved across the window in a slow shudder. "Do you?" he said. "No," said Hermione. "God help me. No." He stayed 31 minutes. She counted and he let her count, and that was the day something shifted between them so decisively that neither of them could pretend otherwise afterwards, though only one of them would be permitted to keep it. He talked. It came out of him in fragments, like water through a wall. Nothing about the thing itself, which he could not approach, but everything around it. He told her about the house in the Loire, and the garden, and the 3-line letters. He told her that he had not been able to sleep in a dark room since the war, and kept a candle burning, and had let it gutter into the sheets twice. He told her he had gone to every one of the funerals he was permitted to attend, and had stood at the back, and had not gone into the churchyard afterwards, ever, because he had not earned the walk. Hermione sat on the flower bin with her boots swinging, and did not say a single one of the reassuring things she wanted to say. She had learned that much. Reassurance was a door closing. Silence was a door held open. "Do you know what I do?" she said at last. "When I can't bear it." "Bake." "Bake." She nodded. "Because you can't argue with yeast. It rises or it doesn't. There's no what if I'd. There's just heat and time, and the thing gets made." "Heat and time," he said. "That's all it is. You'd be amazed what you can survive if somebody puts bread in front of you at the right moment. He looked at her for a long moment. I would not be amazed, he said. I've had 312 of them. Hermione went very still on the flour bin. 312 what? She said softly. He did not answer, but he did not look away either, and in the silence she felt the number settle into her like a stone into deep water, and she thought, clearly, calmly, with the whole of herself, I will get that back. I will get every one of them back if it takes me the rest of my life. He stood. Not yet, she said. Granger, 2 more minutes. There's no more. His voice cracked down the middle. That's the entire cruelty of it. There is never any more. There is only the same 11 minutes, and I have spent 300 of them. He stopped. He put his hand over his mouth, hard, as though physically pushing the rest back in. Hermione slid off the bin. She crossed the floor to him, and he backed up 1 step and hit the wall by the range. And she stood in front of him close enough that she could see the pale roots of his lashes and the pulse jumping in his throat. Look at me, she said. He looked. I am not going to stop, she told him. You can take today. You can take tomorrow. You can take every morning from now until we're both old, and there will still be a woman standing here at 7:10 with 2 croissants in a sleeve. And she will not know why, and she will do it anyway, and that is what you've made. So take it if you must, but don't you tell me it's mercy. His hands came up. They hovered, an inch from her waist, shaking, and then closed on nothing and fell. It isn't mercy, he said. I never said it was. Then what is it? It's the only thing I know how to give you. And he leaned down. She felt the whole weight of him lean, felt the warmth of his breath go across her mouth, felt her own eyes closing without her permission. And at the last possible instant, he turned his head and pressed his lips to her temple instead, once, hard, like a man's sealing an envelope. Then he was gone from her, and the wand was out. I hate you, she said. Her voice broke. I want you to know that. Every single day, whatever else I lose, I hope some part of me hates you a bit. It does, said Draco. You've told me 211 times. The white light took her. She was standing at the counter with a cloth in her hand. The bell was swinging. The rain had eased. 2 croissants gone from the tray and coins on the wood, stacked largest to smallest, and a cup of the smoky tea half drunk on the table by the range. Hermione put down the cloth. There was an ache under her sternum like a bruise on the inside, and her temple was faintly warm, and she was humming. 4 notes, minor, turning back on themselves, and she did not know the tune. She stopped humming. Very slowly, she rolled up her left sleeve. The ink had blurred a little at the edges from the heat of the ovens, but it held, black and legible against the pale inside of her arm. 710 grey coat. He erases you. Check ledger. Sugar tin is a decoy. Hermione stared at her own arm in the empty shop while the second batch began to catch and smoke in the range behind her, and she did not move to save it. Then she went to the till and pulled out the ledger and opened it to the page of flour tallies with 4 numbers written along the top margin. And she hummed the tune and understood the key at once and began to read. She did not open the shop. The bread went unbaked. The trays stayed empty. The range died down to a red eye and then to grey, and outside the propped door, the lane filled with the ordinary noise of a Friday. Carts, boots, a woman calling to a child, and Hermione Granger sat cross-legged on the floor behind her own counter, with a ledger open across her knees, and read her own handwriting until the light moved off the page. The coded margins ran through 11 weeks. Some of it was useless. Guesses, false starts, whole paragraphs of theory that later entries demolished with a single furious line. But some of it was not useless at all, and by the time the afternoon had gone, amber she had assembled out of 100 fragments written by 100 women who had each lasted 11 minutes, something that was almost a shape. He cannot say it. Physical? Watch throat. Cannot write it either. Tested, gave him quill. Hand wouldn't move. Frost mark inner wrist. His. Old. Predates the shop. Says. The alternative is a grave with your name on it. Says. It would kill you inside a month. January. Always January. Mother was dying in January. Mother is not dying now. I think he traded something. I think the thing he traded was himself. And at the bottom of the last used page, in letters gone shaky with pressure. If loving him is what kills, then the erasing isn't cruelty. It's the only medicine he has, which means he has been giving me the medicine and swallowing the disease. God. Oh, God, the poor man. Hermione closed the ledger. She sat for a while with her hand flat on the cover and her jaw set hard, and the shop went slowly dark around her, and she found that what she felt was not pity exactly, and not horror exactly. It was something with a much straighter spine. You have been carrying this alone for a year, she thought. You absolute idiot. You colossal, arrogant, self-appointed idiot. Did it never occur to you that I am extremely good at this? Then she got up and lit the lamps and put on the ovens and baked all night, because there was a thing she was going to do in the morning, and she needed her hands to be steady. He came at 7:10. The rain had come back in earnest overnight. It fell straight and heavy, the kind that turns the light green and makes the whole lane sound like the inside of a shell. He came through the door with his coat black across the shoulders and his hair flattened to his skull, and he stopped because the shop was full of candles, 24 of them. On the counter, the sills, the flour bins, along the shelf where the sugar tin had lived. She had lit them at 5, one by one, for no reason she could have defended in a court of law. You've had a fire, he said. I've had an idea. It looks similar. He didn't move from the mat. Water ran off him onto the boards. Granger, what is this? It's Saturday, said Hermione, and I'm shut, and you're getting a proper breakfast for once, instead of standing in my doorway like a drowned ministry summons. Take the coat off. There's a peg. You know where the peg is. He took the coat off. He did know where the peg was. She fed him. That was the whole of her plan, and she was not ashamed of it. Eggs, and the good bread, and the last of the butter, and the smoky tea she hated. He ate the way a man eats when he has forgotten that he is hungry until food is put in front of him, badly at first, and then with a kind of helpless concentration. And she sat across the table with her chin on her hand and let him do it in silence. When he finished, he sat back and looked at the plate as though it had insulted him. That was a mistake, he said. The eggs. This. He gestured at the table, the The candles, the rain-blurred window. You've made it into something. It was always something. It was 11 minutes. It was never 11 minutes, said Hermione. You just kept setting it down after 11 minutes and calling that the same thing. He put his hands over his face. She let him have it. She sat there in her own kitchen with the candle flames leaning in the draught from the door, and she watched Draco Malfoy sit in a chair by a dead range with his hands over his face. And she thought about the number 312, and she kept her voice absolutely level when she finally spoke. Stay today, she said. No. I'm not asking for an explanation. I'm not going to make you fight it. I've seen what it does to you, and I won't watch it twice. She reached across and pulled his wrists down from his face, and he let her, and his skin was cold under her fingers. I'm asking for one day, from now until the shop shuts. That's all. One day where you don't count. You don't know what you're asking for. I've a fair idea. You have no. I know that you traded something in January, she said, and I know what you got for it, and I know that you have been paying the installments alone ever since, and I know that whatever the terms are, they involve me, and that you have never once thought to consult me about them. The rain filled up the silence. He was looking at her the way a man looks at a door that has just opened in a wall he has spent a year proving was solid. How? He said. Because I am the cleverest witch of my generation, said Hermione. And you told me so yourself, and it has apparently not occurred to you that this is a problem for you. And then, because she was tired, because it was raining, because she had baked all night, and she had precisely one day and no memory to lose that she hadn't already lost, she leaned across the table and kissed him. It was not a good kiss. It was clumsy and off-center, and she caught the corner of his mouth as much as anything, and for a full second he sat frozen under it like a man struck by weather. Then his hand came up into her hair, and he kissed her back, and it stopped being clumsy at once. She had to stand to reach him properly. Her hip caught the table, and something went over. The cup, she thought distantly, the good cup. And she did not care in the slightest, because his other arm had come around her waist and pulled, and she went into him with the whole of herself. And he made a sound against her mouth that she would have crossed a war to hear again. He tasted of smoke and tea. His hands were shaking. He kissed her like a starving man being polite about it. And then, when she opened her mouth under his, like a man who had run out of politeness some considerable time ago, and she felt his palms slide up her spine and settle at the back of her neck, as though he had wanted for a year to know the exact weight of her head in his hand. When they broke apart, he did not let go. He rested his forehead against hers and breathed. 312 days, he said. Wrecked. I know. You don't. I know that today's the 313th, said Hermione, and I would like it to be very long. It was very long. They did not talk about it. That was the extraordinary thing. That was what she would have tried to explain if there had been anyone left to tell. They did not spend the day interrogating the curse, or making plans, or circling the thing that could not be named. They spent it in a warm room with the rain coming down. She made him knead dough, and he was appalling at it, and she stood behind him with her hands over his hands and pushed, and he said, "This is undignified," into the top of her head and did not move away. He fixed the drip in the ceiling. He did it without being asked, standing on the stool with his sleeves rolled, and she sat below him with her tea and watched the muscle move in his forearm and the frost thread at his wrist catch the candlelight, and said nothing at all about either. They fell asleep in the afternoon. That was the part she would have wanted to keep above everything else. The rain had settled into a long grey hush, and the range had been fed and was ticking, and they had ended up on the floor with their backs against the flower bins, because there was no sofa, and neither of them had suggested going upstairs. And at some point, she had put her head on his shoulder, and at some point after that, they had both gone under. She woke first. The light had gone the colour of weak tea. His head was tipped back against the bin, and his mouth was slightly open, and he looked, for the first time since she had known him, unguarded. A pale young man with a scar through one eyebrow and violet shadows under his eyes, sleeping in a bakery. She looked at him for a long time. Then she looked down. Her sleeve had ridden up. Below the elbow, under the smudged black ink of her own message to herself, the skin of her inner forearm had changed. A thread of white ran there, hairline fine, sunk just beneath the surface, cold to the touch when she pressed it with her thumb. It had not been there in the morning. She was certain of that. She had rolled her sleeve to read her own writing at 5 o'clock, and there had been nothing but ink and pink burn and freckles. She had been holding still for perhaps a minute when she realized he was awake and watching her. Neither of them said anything. He sat forward very slowly. He took her arm in both hands, the way one takes something already broken, and turned it to the light and looked at the fine white seam, and Hermione watched his face come apart. "It's just a day," she said. "It's one day. It can't. It grows by what it's given." His voice was almost nothing. "You gave it a day. Then take the day off it. Take the hour. Take—" She was gripping his wrist now, hard. "Draco, listen to me. I can work with this. I have been working with it for 11 weeks. I have a ledger. I know about the ledger. You—" She stopped. "How long have you known about the ledger?" 6 weeks, he said. "I read it every morning after you're gone." He touched the white thread on her arm with one finger, delicately, as if it might sting him. "I've read every word you've written about me, including the ones you'd never say out loud." The candles guttered. The rain had stopped, and the lane outside had gone quiet and blue. "Then you know I'm not going to stop," said Hermione. "Yes. And you know I'll have it out of you eventually. All of it. The name of it, the terms, whatever's written in whatever bloody book." "Yes," said Draco. "I know." He said it very calmly. And that, she understood a heartbeat too late, was the sound of a decision. She was already reaching for her wand when he stood up. "Don't," she said. "Draco, don't. I'm close. I'm so close. If you take today, I lose 11 weeks of—" "I know exactly what you lose." He was crying. He did not appear to have noticed. "I have a cabinet full of it." "Then don't. I'm not going to take today," he said. And for one bright, wild instant, she felt her heart lift. Then he raised his wand, and she saw in his face what was actually coming, and she understood that a man who reads a woman's ledger every morning knows precisely which pages to burn. I'm going to take all of it, said Draco. The shop, the tea, 11 weeks, every morning since April. No. You'll wake up tomorrow and you won't know my name. And you'll be alive, Granger, and I'm sorry. I'm so... She threw the cup at his head. It was not a plan. It was pure animal refusal, and it worked exactly as well as such things do. He flinched. The wand went wide, and in the half-second that bought her, she got her own wand up out of her apron pocket and screamed the first spell that came into her hand, and the whole shop went white. The spell she had used was Expelliarmus, because of course it was. Because some things are worn so deep into a person that they come up out of the hands before the mind has voted. And because she had spent a war watching a boy with untidy hair win impossible things with it. Draco's wand went end over end across the shop and struck the wall by the range and dropped into the flower bin. The white light drained out of the air. 2 candles had gone over. One had guttered out on the boards, the other was burning a small black crescent into the wood, and Hermione put her heel on it without looking. They stared at each other across 4 feet of scorched, flowery silence. "Get out," she said. "Granger, get out of my shop." Her voice was not loud. That was the frightening thing about it, and she could hear it herself. It had gone flat and quiet, the register she had used exactly twice in her life, both times in a forest. "You were going to take a year. You were going to reach into my head and take a year of me, and you did not stop to ask. And if you say one word to me now about mercy, I will put you through that window." He did not say a word. He stood with his empty hand still half raised, and his face the colour of the flower on the floor, and he looked at her, and then he bent and picked his coat off the peg and went out into the wet lane without his wand. The cracked bell dropped its coin behind him. Hermione stood absolutely still until she could no longer hear his footsteps. Then she went down onto her knees on the boards among the spilt candles and made a sound she had not made since the spring of the year the war ended. She did not sleep. She had stopped expecting to. At 2 in the morning, she was at the kitchen table upstairs, with every scrap of the case laid out in front of her. The ledger, the locket, the smudged ink on her arm, the 11 weeks decoded and copied out in plain letters on a long roll of butcher's paper. His wand lay across the corner of the table where she had fished it out of the flower bin. Hawthorn, 10 inches. She had held it once before, in a cellar, when it had felt like a live coal in her fist, and it lay there now perfectly quiet. She wrote the terms out as she understood them, in a column, the way she had once written revision notes. 1. An exchange made in January to save a life already lost. 2. He cannot speak of it, write of it, or indicate it directly. 3. Love directed at him is fatal to the one who feels it. 4. The mark appears on the wrist of the one at risk. His is permanent. Mine appears and vanishes when memory is broken. 5. Therefore, the debt is kept in continuous memory. Break the thread and the account is cleared. She stared at point 5 for a long time. Then she picked up the quill again and wrote, underneath, 6. A contract that requires silence is a contract that fears being spoken. She underlined it. Then she underlined it again, so hard the nib went through the paper. Why gag him? Not to protect the terms. Terms don't care who reads them. You gag a man for one reason, because his silence is doing work. Because if he could say it aloud to the right person, in the right place, something in the arrangement would come loose. Which meant there was a counter clause. Which meant there was, somewhere, a way out of it. And the right had been built with a hand over its own mouth to keep him from finding it. Hermione sat back in her chair at 3 a.m, with her heart going hard and even, and thought, he has been trying to save me from a curse he was never permitted to read the small print of. She found the flat on the second day. It was not difficult, which told her something about how badly he had been managing. He bought bread on Blunder Street on the days she was shut. He posted 3-line letters to France from the box at the top of the lane. And the woman who ran the apothecary, when asked, said, "Oh, the quiet one, upstairs, 2nd floor, doesn't half keep odd hours," and then, squinting, "Are you the girl from the bakery? He talks about you." Hermione stopped with her hand on the doorframe. "He talks about me." "Not to me, love." The woman went back to her scales. To himself, on the stairs, every morning, same time. The stairs smelled of camphor and damp plaster. She stood outside the door on the 2nd landing, with her fist raised for a full half-minute, before she understood that she was not going to knock, and that she had not come to knock, and that she had brought his wand not to return it, but because a man without a wand cannot lock a door against a woman who has one. Alohomora. The room beyond was almost empty. A bed, unslept in, a chair, a window with a view of the roof line, and, if you leaned, the top of Ravensbourne Lane. A plate on the table with 2 croissants going grey and hard, and one entire wall taken up by a cabinet. Hermione crossed the floor and opened it, and stood there, and did not move for a very long time. 11 shelves, rows and rows of small stoppered glass, silver-white light turning slowly inside every one, restless, never still. The first 40 bore dates in a cramped hand she recognized from 6 years of essays, returned with sneering marginalia. The rest bore nothing at all. She began to count and gave it up at 90, and simply stood there with her hand over her mouth. Every morning, every single morning since April, taken out of her head at 11 minutes past 7, and carried up 2 flights of stairs, and set in its place, and the man had built shelves for it. He had gone out and bought or made 11 shelves, in the full knowledge of what he was going to need them for, and he had not thrown a single one of them away. She reached out and took one down. It was cold. Inside, the thread of her own vanished morning coiled and uncoiled like something breathing. Behind her, the door. "That's mine," said Draco. Hermione turned around with the vial in her fist. He was in the doorway in yesterday's shirt, with 2 days on his jaw and his hands hanging empty at his sides. And she had never in her life seen a person look so entirely finished. "It is not yours," she said. "It's mine. All of it is mine." "You've been keeping me in a cupboard." "I couldn't," his voice snagged. "I tried to destroy them. Twice." "Why didn't you?" He looked at the shelves. "Because then there'd be nowhere at all," he said, "that any of it had happened." Hermione closed her eyes. "Don't," she told herself. "Don't you dare go soft at him. Not yet. Not for another 5 minutes." "Sit down," she said. "Granger." "Sit down, Malfoy, before you fall down." He sat on the edge of the bed. She stayed where she was, with the cabinet open behind her and the light of 300 stolen mornings on the side of her face, and she took the folded roll of butcher's paper out of her coat and shook it open. "I'm going to talk," she said. "And you're going to say nothing at all because you can't, and I don't want to watch you try. When I get something right, look at me. When I get something wrong, look at the floor. Can you manage that?" He looked at her. Good. Her hands were shaking. She flattened the paper against her thigh. "January. Your mother was dying, and the healers had stopped pretending. You went home, and you found something in that house. A book, a rite, something with your family's fingerprints all over it. And you made an offer. You said, 'Take it out of me instead.'" He looked at her. "You expected it to take your life." He looked at her. "It didn't. It took..." Her voice went. She got it back. "It took the safety of you. Anyone who loves you now, it comes out of them. Not you. Never you. You'd have paid it in your own blood 10 times over, and it wouldn't let you, would it? That's the whole architecture of the thing. It makes other people the currency." He looked at her. His eyes were streaming. "And you can't say any of it," said Hermione. "Not one syllable, because the rite gagged you. And I want you to consider, Draco, that a contract that gags a man is a contract that is afraid of him, and that in 19 months it has apparently never occurred to you to ask why." He looked at the floor. Then, slowly, he looked back up at her, and there was something in his face she had not seen before. Not grief, something rawer and much more dangerous. "You've been going about this like a man serving a sentence," she said, "when you should have been going about it like a man reading a contract. But then you'd have needed someone to read it with, and you decided unilaterally that you didn't deserve one." He said nothing. The muscle in his jaw stood out. "There is a counter-right," said Hermione. "Isn't there?" He stared at her. He did not look at the floor. He did not look at her either. He was fighting it, the whole of him rigid, his hands twisted in the bedclothes, his throat working around a word that would not come. And Hermione crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt on the boards in front of him and took his face in both her floury hands. "Don't fight it," she said. "Don't. Listen, you can't say it. Fine, then don't say it. I'll say it. I'll say all of it, and you sit there and let me be right." His forehead came down against hers. His breath was ragged. "There's a book," she said. "In the manor." Nothing. "Under it," she tried. "A cellar." His hands closed on her wrists so hard it hurt. "Right," said Hermione, and her voice cracked wide open on it, and she was laughing, and it was not really laughing. "Right. Good. There we are. Now, put your coat on." "Granger." He was almost inaudible. "If you go down there, if you read it, then I'll know. Then it will know that you know." "Good," she said. "It's about time somebody in this arrangement was frightened of me." And she got up off her knees and put his wand into his hand and went to the door and stopped because he had not moved, and turned back to find him still sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at her as though she were a thing he had never once dared to imagine. "Why?" he said. "Why what?" "Why are you doing this? You've known about it for 2 days. You don't remember any of it. You don't remember a single morning, not one. You have no..." His voice failed. "You have no reason." Hermione stood in the doorway of that bare room with 312 stolen mornings glittering behind her, and rolled up her left sleeve and held out her arm. Beneath the smeared ink, The thread of white ran clear and cold under her skin. "It's still there," she said quietly. "You didn't take yesterday. And it's still there, Draco, which means it isn't going anywhere this time, which means whatever I feel for you has finally got its hooks in past the place your charm can reach, and I have got, at a rough estimate, about a month." The rain started again against the window. "So, put your coat on," said Hermione Granger. "We're going to your house." The manor had gone to the birds. That was the first thing she noticed, coming up the drive in a fine grey drizzle with her hand in his. The house had a hole in its roof over the east wing, and starlings went in and out of it in a loose ribbon, and nobody had done anything about it in 19 months. The peacocks were gone. The gravel had grass in it. The great door stood ajar because the wards had been broken by ministry men in the spring and never mended. She had promised herself she would be fine. She was not fine. Her body knew the hallway before her mind did. The black and white flags, the height of the ceiling, the particular acoustic emptiness of a house with too many rooms. And by the time they reached the foot of the stairs, she had stopped walking and was standing with her breath coming short and shallow and her free hand pressed flat against the wall. Draco stopped with her. He did not say anything. He did not tell her it was all right, or that it was over, or any of the other useless things. He simply stood between her and the drawing-room door so that she could not see into it, and waited. "Thank you," she said after a while. "Don't." "I wasn't being kind. I was being accurate." They went down. The undercellar was beneath the wine cellar, and beneath the ice house below that, and the stair to it was cut out of the chalk itself, worn concave in the middle of each tread by 400 years of Black and Malfoy feet. It smelled of cold stone and old candle tallow, and something underneath both, faintly metallic, the way a coin smells when it has been held too long in a fist. He lit the sconces with a flick. They caught with a low blue flame that gave no warmth. The room at the bottom was small, smaller than she had imagined, no bigger than her own kitchen, and almost bare. A stone table, a gutter cut into the floor around it, running to a drain. A bracket in the wall where a knife hung, bone-handled, unremarkable, the sort of thing you would use for boning a fish. And on a lectern of dark wood, a book. Hermione stood at the foot of the stairs and looked at it, and felt the whole room turn its attention on her, the way a dog looks up when a stranger comes into the yard. "It knows I'm here," she said. Draco's hand tightened on hers. She went to it. She had to. There was no version of this where she did not. And she noted, with the small clinical part of herself that had never once deserted her, that he did not follow, that he stopped 6 feet short and stood there with his fists at his sides, and that the gag would not even let him walk toward it while she was looking. The pages were vellum and heavy. The hand was crabbed, 17th century, and the ink had gone the colour of dried blood, which she suspected was not a metaphor. Vitae Pretium. She read it 3 times. The rite itself was 4 lines long and appallingly simple. Beneath it, in a different hand and a much later century, ran the marginalia, commentary, warnings, the accumulated regrets of a family who had used this thing more than once and had, apparently, never once thought to stop. The ledger keeps its account in continuous recollection. Sever the thread, and the reckoning is lost, though this is a mercy of days only and cannot serve a lifetime. She had known that. Her own ledger said as much. The pledger shall be made mute in the matter of his pledge, that he might not seek release. For the account is void where the debt is refused in full knowledge. Hermione put her finger on the line and stopped breathing. Void where the debt is refused in full knowledge. She read it again, and again. And then she went down the page hunting, and found what she was looking for 4 inches lower in the smallest hand of all, as though the writer had hoped nobody would ever get this far. Refusal must be spoken by one who is subject to the debt, in full knowledge of its terms, freely and without compulsion. The pledger being mute, refusal is impossible to him. It is therefore held by this house that the right admits no undoing. H.B. 1683. The pledger being mute. "Draco," said Hermione. Her voice came out very strange. "One who is subject to the debt," she read aloud. "Not the pledger, not the one who made the offer. One who is subject to the debt." Draco, who is subject to it? Who's actually carrying it? He looked at her. He was white to the lips. She held up her arm. The white thread ran under her skin like a wire. "Me," she said. "I am. I'm the one it's collecting from. I am the debt, and I am not mute." He came apart then. She had not expected that. She had expected argument, obstruction, the whole grim machinery of his protection, and instead, he simply put his back against the chalk wall and slid down it until he was sitting on the cold floor with his arms over his head. Hermione knelt in front of him. "Listen to me. It'll take you." His voice was muffled. "You don't know what it takes. It looks in your pockets, Granger. It goes through everything you have, and it picks the one thing. I know. You don't. I have read the same 4 lines you read," she said, "in the same book, at the same lectern, and unlike you, I have read the margins, and unlike you, I have had somebody standing behind me while I did it, which is the entire difference between us, and always has been." She took his wrists and pulled them down. "You did this alone in the dark at 18 years old to save your mother, and you did it wrong. And the only reason you did it wrong is that there was nobody there to check your working." He laughed. It was a terrible sound in that room. "And now there is." "Yes," said Hermione. "Now there is." She stood up. She went to the wall and lifted the bone-handled knife off its bracket, and it was lighter than she expected, which somehow made it worse. "Terms," she said. "Say them with me. You can't say them alone. Fine. But you can listen, and I need to know I've got it right. So look at me when I'm right, and look at the floor when I'm wrong. Ready?" He got up. He was shaking so hard she could see it from across the room. "The right is a debt," she said. "Payment is taken in love directed at you." He looked at her. "The debt is carried by the one who loves. That's me." He looked at her. "The debt is void where it is refused, in full knowledge, freely, by the one who carries it." He looked at her. And then, all at once, he was across the room and had her by both arms. "You have to know," he said. "That's the trap. That's the whole trap, in full knowledge. You have to know what you're refusing, and you can't. You can't possibly. You don't remember 312. Then give them back." The words landed in the cold room like a stone into still water. He stared at her. "They're upstairs in a cabinet," said Hermione. 11 shelves of me. Give them back, Draco. All of them. Every morning you've ever taken, and then I will know exactly what I am refusing, because I'll have every last hour of loving you sitting in my own head where it belongs, and there will not be a single thing about this that I have not chosen. It'll kill you. He was crying openly now. Granger, 300 days of it, all at once. The mark will... Then we'd better be quick, she said. They apparated. It took 11 minutes to fetch the cabinet's contents and 11 minutes to come back, and she remembered later almost nothing of the interval except the weight of the crate in her arms and the sound of the glass shifting inside it. He set out the pensive on the stone table, his mother's, shallow, pewter, cold as a font, and he began to unstopper them one by one, and Hermione stood at the edge of the basin and put her face into 312 mornings. She would not have survived it in sequence. She went in, and the mornings came at her all together, not as a line, but as a weather. Rain on copper gutters, the crack of a brass bell, a chair pulled from a wall, 2 croissants in a parchment sleeve. You should see to it. It's bleeding into my breakfast. Don't be kind to me. It's a poor use of a morning. Her own hand reaching for a second cup. A tune of 4 notes hummed over dough. His fingers cold on the back of her hand above the knuckle. Believe her. She's cleverer than both of us. 100, 200, 300 separate versions of the exact instant in which she had understood, in a warm room that smelled of bread, that she was in love with him. 312 times. She had done it 312 times, and it had been true every single time, and she had never once been allowed to keep it. She came up out of the basin with her hair wet and her hands white on the rim, and she was laughing and sobbing at once, and her left forearm was blazing with cold. The thread had thickened to a cord, gone from hairline to the width of a bootlace, running white and hard from wrist to elbow. Draco caught her as her knees went. "Granger, I know you," she said into his collar. "I know you. 312. I've got them all. They're all in here. Your arm. Give me the knife." She cut her palm herself. She would not let him do it, and afterwards she was glad of that, because it mattered, because every part of it had to be hers, or the whole thing was worth nothing. The blood ran into the gutter cut around the table, and the cold blue flames in the sconces bent all at once toward it, and the room woke up. She felt it look at her. There was no other word. Something vast and unhurried, and entirely without malice, turned its attention on the small warm creature bleeding on its floor, the way a clerk looks up at a customer. "My name is Hermione Jean Granger," she said. Her voice did not shake. She had been rehearsing it since the stairs. On the 4th of January, in the year the war ended, Draco Lucius Malfoy pledged himself to you for his mother's life, and you took your payment in the form of the people who love him. I am one of those people. I have loved him across 312 mornings, and I remember every one of them, and I know precisely what the loving costs, and I am not confused, and nobody has asked this of me, and no one has compelled me. The flames stood straight up. The cold in the room went so deep, she felt it in her teeth. Behind her, Draco made a sound, and she heard him move, and she said, without turning round, "Don't Don't touch me. Don't say a word. If you interfere, it's not free." He stopped. She looked down at her opened hand. "I refuse the debt," said Hermione Granger, "in full knowledge, freely. I will not pay it, and I will not have it paid on my behalf, and I do not accept the terms. Take it off him." For a moment, nothing. Then the cord of white on her arm went so cold that she screamed, and unravelled thread by thread, and drew out of her skin like a splinter drawing out of a wound, and hung in the air over the table in a slow turning coil of light. And the room, quite clearly, in a voice that was not a voice and used no sound at all, put a question to her. Then the account stands open. What is offered in its place? She had known. She had known since the margin, since the right admits no undoing, since the moment she understood that nothing in this house had ever been free. "Whatever's in his pockets," said Hermione. "Take it out of him." "No!" Draco lunged. He was too late, and she had never in her life been more grateful for anything, because the coil of white light turned once and went into him, into the chest, through the shirt, without a mark, and Draco Malfoy went rigid and then dropped to his knees on the chalk floor. The frost thread on his wrist flared, blazed white, and went out. The sconces died. In the darkness, Hermione crawled across the freezing floor with her hand bleeding and found him by touch, his shoulder, his jaw, his open, unseeing eyes, and got his head into her lap and said his name, and said it again. He blinked. He looked up at her in the dark with the whole of his face perfectly, terribly blank. "I'm sorry," he said politely. "Do I know you?" She did not weep in the cellar. There would be time for that, and she was economical about time now. She had learned its price. She got him up the chalk stairs with his arm over her shoulders and his weight going sideways, and out through the hall with its black and white flags, and into the drizzle on the drive where the starlings were still going in and out of the broken roof, and she sat him down on the mounting block by the gate and crouched in front of him and held his face in her bleeding hands and looked at what was left. It was all there. That was the strange, merciful cruelty of it. The scar through the eyebrow, the pale roots of the lashes, the mouth that had said please to her in a warm room. The debt had gone through his pockets, exactly as he had warned her it would, and it had found the only thing in them worth having, and it had taken every last morning of her. 312. And the shop, and the tea, and the ledger, and the 11 shelves, and the girl who had shouted at him across a classroom when they were both 12 years old. All of it back to nothing. "You've hurt your hand," he said. He said it gently to a stranger. He took a handkerchief out of his coat, folded, pressed, the habit surviving the man, and wrapped it round her palm, and tied it, and his fingers were cold and careful, and he had absolutely no idea who she was. "Yes," said Hermione. "It's all right. It'll mend. You should see to it properly." "I will." She sat back on her heels in the wet gravel and looked at him for a while. "Do you know your name?" "Draco Malfoy." A frown. I know quite a lot, actually. I know the house. I know my mother's in France." His hand went to his wrist, to the inner wrist, where there was nothing at all now, and he looked at the unmarked skin with an expression of mild, floating bewilderment. "There was something here, wasn't there? There was something here for a long time, and it's gone, and I can't—" "It's gone," she agreed. "It's gone for good. That part's true." "Who are you?" Hermione stood up. The rain was thinning. Away over the fields, the cloud had begun to break, and a low, unserious sun was coming through, the kind that means nothing about the rest of the day. "My name is Hermione Granger," she said. "I run a bakery off Ravensbourne Lane. There's no name on the window. You come in every morning at 7:10 and you buy plain croissants, which nobody does, and I put 2 in the sleeve, and I've never once told you why." He blinked up at her. "Do I? You have for 312 days. "That's absurd," said Draco Malfoy. "I don't like croissants." And Hermione put her ruined hand over her mouth and laughed until she had to sit down on the mounting block beside him, and he watched her with the polite alarm of a man who has said something unaccountable to a woman on a drive in the rain. She let him go home. She had to. She had learned what it cost to decide things on another person's behalf, and she was not about to start doing it herself on the same afternoon. She took him to the flat on Blunder Street and showed him where it was and did not go up. And then she went back to her shop and stood in the middle of it among the spilt candles and the flour on the boards and the cup she had thrown, and she began, very methodically, to make a plan. Because here was the thing. He had spent 19 months making her decisions for her out of love and terror, and it had been unforgivable, and she had forgiven him roughly 11 minutes after understanding it. But she had learned the lesson properly. You do not hand someone a life and tell them to feel a certain way about it. You do not walk up to a man with an empty year in his head and say, "You love me? You have loved me for 312 mornings. Here is the evidence. Now do it again." You let him choose. Every day, freely, with nothing on his wrist to be frightened of. But you also, and this was the part she thought about all that night with the range going, and the dough rising, and her hand throbbing under its bandage, you also do not leave him without the evidence. She had lived 11 weeks in the dark, robbed of her own facts, and she would not do to him what had been done to her. So, the truth in full, and then no pressure at all. She started at 4 in the morning, as usual. The box took her 9 days. She wrote out every morning she could reconstruct, and she could reconstruct all of them. That was the thing. They were hers now, 312 of them sitting in her head in perfect order like a shelf of books. She wrote them longhand, 91 sheets. She did not tidy them or make them flattering. She put in the mornings when he had been curt, and the mornings when she had been unbearable, and the morning she had told him his opinions on scones revealed a defect of character. She put in the ledger, with the code broken and written plain in the margin. She put in the 9 notes from the sugar tin, which she had copied out from memory, because he had burned the originals, and she found she did not mind. She put in her mother's locket, with a fingernail-sized disc still folded inside it. He is cursed. He thinks loving him kills. He is trying to save me. And she put in the vials. All 312 of them, empty now, stoppered with their old wax, each one a small glass container of nothing at all. She had thought about throwing them away, and had found she could not, for precisely the same reason he had not been able to. And this struck her as the single most damning piece of evidence in the entire box. On the 10th morning, she wrote the last sheet and laid it on the top. "Draco, everything in this box is true, and none of it is a request. You do not owe me a year. You do not owe me a feeling. What was taken from you was taken because of a choice I made, freely, with my eyes open, and I would make it again this morning, and every morning after. So there is no debt here, and I will be extremely cross if you try to invent one. I am not asking you to remember. I know that's finished. I am asking whether you would like to start. The shop is off Ravensbourne Lane. There's no name on the window. I open at 7. H.G. She tied the box with string. She sent it by owl at 6. And then she opened the shop and baked and served and wiped down the counter and waited. He did not come the first day, nor the second, nor the third. On the fourth day, she caught herself putting 2 croissants into a parchment sleeve at 7:10 for nobody at all. And she stood there holding it with her eyes shut and her jaw tight and thought, well, that's the answer then, and you have no right whatsoever to complain about it. On the 7th day, it rained. It came straight down from a low sky, the kind that turns the light green and makes the lane sound like the inside of a shell. And Hermione had the door propped with the iron hair and the first trays out, and the smoky tea she hated steaming on the counter for no reason she was prepared to examine. At 7:10, the cracked bell dropped its coin of sound into the room. She turned around with the cloth in her hand. He was on the mat with the rain coming off the shoulders of his grey coat and the box under one arm, and he was wet through and had clearly walked. And he stood there without moving in the way of a man who has been outdoors a long time and has forgotten that indoors is warmer. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "You're wet through," said Hermione. "It's raining." I'd worked that out. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, the place where a smile would go if he ever let one out, and she had to put her hand flat on the counter. He came forward and set the box down between them. The vials shifted inside it with a small chiming rattle. "I've read all of it," he said. 4 times. I sat up with it. And I don't remember one single thing in it." His voice was not steady, not the drip in the ceiling, not the tune, not the woman on Thackeray Street, whoever she is. "I read 91 pages about a man I have never met who did something unforgivable to you every day for the better part of a year, and I couldn't feel a thing about him except that he was clearly out of his mind." "He was tired," said Hermione. "There's a difference, not much of one. You gave up a year of me to a book in a cellar." "I refused a debt," she said. "That's all. The rest was the price, and I'd have paid double." "Why?" "Because you were going to die of it," said Hermione. "Not quickly. That was rather the point. You'd have gone on for 50 years buying pastry from a woman who never knew your name, and you'd have called it decency, and it would have hollowed you out like a gourd, and I was not going to sit in the middle of that and be grateful." He looked at her. "There's something I need to say," he said, "and I'd like to say it badly, because I'm going to." "All right." "I don't love you." He said it steadily. "I can't. Whatever that man had, he took it with him. I've read about it. I've held the empty bottles of it, and there is nothing in me where it should be. And I could pretend. I've had 4 days to work out how, and I could walk in here and give a very convincing performance of a man remembering, and you'd know within the hour, and it would be the second time you'd been lied to in this room." Hermione's throat had closed. She nodded. "But I stood outside," said Draco, "for 11 minutes, in the rain, reading a window with no name on it. And I want you to know that I did not want to come in because of the box." He took a breath. "I wanted to come in because I could smell the bread, and there was a woman inside moving trays about, and I thought I would like to know what she sounds like. That's all. That's the entire sum of what I have. It isn't 312 mornings. It's one." The rain came down. The range ticked. Somewhere above them, a pipe knocked twice, and the drip in the ceiling did not fall, because a man on a stool had fixed it on a Saturday she remembered, and he did not. "One is how it started the first time," said Hermione. She reached under the counter and took out the parchment sleeve she had been filling since Tuesday for nobody, and set it on the wood between them. "Two?" he said, looking into it. "Yes." "Why two?" "I have absolutely no idea," said Hermione Granger. "My hands do it. They've been doing it for 320 days, and I've never once caught them at it in time." And Draco Malfoy laughed. It came out of him ragged and astonished, a sound he had plainly not made in years, and it broke something open in the room, and she came round the counter without deciding to, and he met her halfway, and there was a half-second of nothing at all, of two people standing very close in a warm room that smelled of yeast and scorched sugar, of his hand coming up and stopping and coming up again. "May I?" he said. "You never asked before." "I'm asking now." "Yes," said Hermione. "God, yes." He kissed her. It was clumsy and off-centre, and he caught the corner of her mouth as much as anything, because he did not know her yet, because he had never done this, because the man who had known exactly how she liked to be kissed was gone and was not coming back, and this one was starting from the beginning. And then his hand slid up into her hair and found the back of her skull, as though some part of him below the reach of any spell had kept the weight of it, and it stopped being clumsy at once. She had to stand on her toes. Her hip caught the counter, and the coins went over and rolled away across the boards, largest to smallest, and neither of them moved to pick them up. When they broke apart, he did not let go. He rested his forehead against hers and breathed, and she felt his thumb move once against her hairline, once unbearably, and she made a small wrecked sound against his mouth. "That's one," he said. "That's one," she agreed. Outside, the rain was easing. The lane came back, wet cobbles, each one holding its own small piece of sky, the blur of an umbrella going past. "Same time tomorrow," said Draco. Hermione Granger, who had spent a year being robbed of her mornings and had gone into a cellar under a cursed house and taken every last one of them back, looked up at him and did not let go of his coat. "Same time tomorrow," she said, "and the day after that, and you'll be here for all of them, and so will I, and neither of us is going to forget a single one." And that, in the end, was the whole of it. A small shop with no name on the window, 2 croissants in a parchment sleeve, a cracked bell that never chimed cleanly, and a man who came in out of the rain at 7:10 and stayed.
Thank you for staying with me. I want to tell you one small thing. There is a moment in this story that I wrote first, before everything else. It is the moment when Hermione stands alone in her shop. She does not know why. She just feels empty. And then she looks down and she is holding a piece of paper in her own handwriting. That is where the whole story came from. While I was writing, I keep thinking about one question. Is it love when you protect someone by lying to them? Draco thought he was being kind. He was not being kind. He was being afraid. He decided everything alone, in the dark for years, and it almost destroyed them both. Hermione did the opposite. She did not have her memory, she had almost nothing, but she had a pencil, and she chose. I think that is the whole story really. Love is not protecting someone from the truth. Love is attracting them with it. So here's what I hope. If someone is deciding things for you, even with a soft voice, even with good intentions, I hope you pick up your pencil. And if you are the one deciding for somebody else, please just tell them. Let them choose. Thank you for listening. Same time tomorrow.